Welcome back. You're now watching the political segment on The Weekend Show. My name is Andy Madaki. Now, on this show, we have different segments where we talk about different things. But for the next 6 weeks, I'm dedicating this show to conversation with some of the most brilliant minds I've met and I know, and to learning a thing or two from them as we enter into the new year. Now, joining us on today's episode, we have Buffy Okeke-Ojiudu, who is the CEO Zebra Group. And most times it's asked if he's my brother. Good morning, brother.
And your little clone.
Yes, you are. Don't commit any crimes in public because I don't want anybody coming to ask me if that was me.
Fear not. Fear not.
9 years ago, you gave a talk at TEDx.
Was that 9 years?
Yes.
Wow.
On identity and purpose.
Yes.
And during that TEDx talk, you spoke about Nigeria finding its identity and purpose. It's 9 years. Do you think we found our identity and purpose?
I think the question would be, have we tried to find our identity and purpose? I don't think that we're walking or working in that direction still, right? And we definitely have not found our identity and purpose. I think we still operate within our tribal identities and regional identities within the country. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we still don't have one unifying identity or goal for Nigeria. Now, the entertainment sector, the younger generation of Nigerians within that space have found theirs. I think within this Niger, not Nigeria, Niger, they found sort of what it means to be a Nigerian within that, or a Niger boy or girl or man or woman within that, right? And that they're propagating globally now. And you can see the effect of that. But when we think of it economically, politically, as a country, outside of what's happening within our entertainment sector, I think we have not yet, you know.
In 2014, before the general elections, you and I had conversations about how it's time for young people to be involved. It's time for young people to actively engage. A lot of people gave up on that dream 8, 9 years ago. It's now about 11 years where we just had that conversation. We now have the Not Too Young to Run bill, which has been passed. We do have quite a record number of young people in political systems. I recall seeing someone who is a member of the House of Representatives told me that, and people fought for this, and some of us are beneficiaries of this. But has anything changed with young people now getting positions of responsibility?
I mean, within this government, I think we have quite a few young people. We had the youngest ever Minister of Youth, even though she's been changed. First female as well. We have a young Minister of Steel, I think, quite young. We have a lot of young people as SAs within the administration.
I heard of parastatals
and
as well.
Exactly,
yeah.
Smeden, et cetera, you have young people there.
Naseni.
Exactly.
Is another one with
exactly.
Yeah.
In House of Reps, you have a lot of young people who've gone in. Some people in, not mostly, but a lot in their early 30s have gone in as well. So I think you're seeing a sort of following NSAS, sort of a political awakening amongst the younger breed of Nigerians. The last elections, they were very active. Whether they'll be very active in the next elections, I don't know. But I think we're seeing people a bit more awake to politics and how it affects their daily lives, right? So, yeah.
When President Muhammadu Buhari was running for government, at his second time, he spoke a lot about infrastructure and agriculture. When President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was running, he spoke about agriculture, and people said agbado and corn and all whatnot. But you've been quite intentional about the agricultural sector, and that's why I called you here today to talk about agriculture innovation in 2025, because if people don't have food, there's insecurity, there's crime and all whatnot. So it's a political issue, agriculture. And Nigeria has about 34 million hectares of arable land. About 24% of Nigeria's GDP, agriculture accounts for it. You have planted yourself in that space, and not just with agriculture at the bare minimum, but also a blend of innovation and technology. Why did you find yourself going on the road less traveled? Because it's not an attractive space for young people.
Yes, I agree. So I'll start with the last thing. It's not an attractive space for young people because I think there's a gap in information, right? We have one of the fastest growing populations on the planet. We have one of the youngest populations in the world, sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, but also Nigeria. So our group population growth rate, last I checked, was about 3 points. I don't know what it is now, but last I checked, it was 3.2% or something like that. So you're going to have a lot of mouths to feed. People must eat. So definitely there's a lot of growth in that area. As far as our arable land is concerned, we currently operate on less than, correct, I might be wrong about this. Actually, yeah, less than 35% of our arable land.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be done. Why I went into agriculture? So first of all, I'm not the first in my family. I'm third generation. Both paternal and maternal grandparents were in agriculture from the entrepreneurial standpoint to the policy standpoint. So I had the benefit of information and insight, right? Back in the day, in the 60s, 50s, when Nigeria was big in agriculture, this is before oil became a big thing, we were number one in a series of commodities, between number 1 and 3. Number 1 in oil palm globally, number 3 in cocoa, I think, globally, and some other commodities of that nature. And if you look at the way the systems operated then, there was clear frameworks. You had, first of all, the regional, because we operated in regions. So each regional government would have, first of all, a farm settlement where they'd have pre-farming supports for the farmers, designated areas for farming, pre-farming supports. After that, they'd have what you call the produce buyers, people who are licensed or organizations who are licensed to buy produce from the farm settlements. Now, those prices mostly were predetermined by the government as well, so that the farmers get fair returns on their labor. Now, because they've predetermined those prices, the produce buyers now are connected to the government marketing board. The marketing board now helps them sell that product that they've either processed or bought to trade. The marketing boards had offices globally, across the continent, and in some cases in the Western world as well. So they basically took the system that was created during colonialism and added an African flair to it, and it worked. It worked very well up until the military came, right? And it continued to work, but it dwindled over the years as oil and gas came in. So when you look back at that system and see how well it worked and how well we were doing, for me as a young man, that was very attractive. The idea of recreating that with modern tools. So now you have technology. Things can happen faster. You can scale faster, right? You don't have to toil for 5 years to get certain data. You can get it instantaneously. So the question for me then became, how do you sort of look back to what we had before, but create a modern version of that, leveraging modern tools and technology? And that's what we're trying to do with Zebra.
So, I mean, and you've just said that's what you're trying to do with Zebra, but tell me about the Zebra Group. What's that?
So Zebra was conceptualized when I was in graduate school, in my early 20s. At first, I was trying to set up a beverage brand called Zebra Splash, right? So I finished graduate school, moved to China for a bit, and put together this company on paper. Came back to Nigeria to try and raise money, and it was difficult. But anyway, that's a whole long story. But the first successful venture we went into was media, in the media space, right? We started a newspaper back in the day, and media services. And the capital or the revenue or profits from there went into agriculture on a small scale. We started trading first, and then from trading, we started leasing factories. From leasing factories, we started building our own factories, and that's how Zebra Agro Industries was born. So we operate a mid-scale network of food processing factories. Then from Zebra Agro Industries, we created Zebra Crop Bank, which is trying to go continental with creating last-mile tech-enabled micro solar-powered storage facilities across Nigeria and hopefully across Africa.
You've answered my next question, which was about the Crop Bank. How is that doing?
I mean, it's doing very well. It's tough. It's very tough because we, alongside a lot of others in the space, are essentially making the market. It's almost blue ocean when you go out to farm gates, right? The reason that agriculture has somewhat struggled in much of sub-Saharan Africa and definitely in Nigeria is because there's a gap in last mile infrastructure. When people think of agriculture or building factories, it's typically situated around townships, maybe the big cities. So you go to Lagos, you see a lot of big factories. You go to Ogun, a lot of big factories, Enugu, the core cities. But when you go to where the core agrarian activity happens, there's nothing there. So the supply chain, completely fragmented, from logistics to storage to primary processing, which is necessary. So you have farmers drying their produce for like 2-3 weeks, right? You have problems moving commodities from one part of the country to another. In fact, from one part of a state to another. But you have factories struggling to get access to raw materials. But the raw materials exist. But because that supply chain is so broken, everyone's struggling. So the farmers are struggling, the factories are struggling. You have big people, when I say big people, as in strong corporations setting up factories and they're closing down. I know that, or I believe that one of the Tony Lumelu's subsidiaries, they had a fruit processing factory in Benue. I'm not so sure that's operating anymore. I'm not sure. I know that Dangote set up a tomato processing facility. You know how that struggled.
Yeah.
And a lot of these problems are access to raw materials. But at the same time, you see the spoilage rate. We have, depending on the commodity, anywhere between 30 and 60% of our commodity spoiling, right? It makes no sense. We import a lot. Nigeria alone imports over $10 billion of food into Nigeria per annum. That's incredible. That's incredible. Yet we're producing, right? So,
I come from Benue State, which is literally 3-4 hours away from Abuja, and we do have good roads from here all the way there. But the wastage and spoilage is a big problem. And so a lot of times, I grew up in a house where we had at least about 10 orange trees.
oh, wow.
And so literally it's falling, we're plucking them off, like Benue down the road, there's a river. So we have all of that, but when you see the IGR the state is making, it's embarrassing. When you see the wastage and the hunger and poverty, even in that place, it's very disappointing. And a couple of people have tried doing what you're doing, what even Dangote has tried, and we know how it's been. I remember the young people who came from Harvard and did tomato juice a couple of years ago. I was a bit skeptical, even though we don't judge. I was like, do they really understand the market and how it works? And they got a lot of funding, which I don't even think you've gotten till today, which is a big problem in this space, getting access to capital. It's easier for non-Africans and Caucasians to get access to these fundings than it is for you. And my point is, some of them have tried it and it has failed. But you have coconut head, like we like to say. You're still doing it. What are you doing differently from what they have done?
I don't know that I'm doing anything particularly differently. I think that the current zeitgeist within the agriculture space or the impact investment space has allowed for more capital to come to the continent. Historically, it was very difficult to raise money for agriculture businesses, right? The banks were giving, I can't remember the actual percentage, but I know it was less than 9% of bank funding, the average bank to agriculture space. But in 2008, the term impact investment was born. And give another 5-10 years, it came in full effect in Africa, on the continent. Within the past 3 years, I think, Africa has raised over, sub-Saharan Africa, for $5 billion in impact investment. A sizable chunk of that, most of that in agriculture, a sizable chunk of that into Nigeria as well. So you have more capital to solve some of these age-old problems now. And I think that our company, alongside some others, are the beneficiaries of this zeitgeist, if you like, right? So what maybe not what I'm doing differently, but what I'm doing.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we are focused at farm gate. We understand that for things to operate here, you have to meet people where they are. What typically happens is we come up with this borrowed and idealized version of agriculture where it's a big factory, huge big silo, huge big storage facility, typically not ideally located. Then you start hustling to get the raw materials or get utilization. What we've decided to do is run a decentralized system, smaller, sometimes modular, directly at farm gate, right? Because we understand that that's how our system works. In the West, you have, say, designated agriculture areas. A country is filled with cities and big towns, and then you have smaller designated agriculture areas. So it's easy to organize and build supply chain systems around that. Here, on the other hand, it's the reverse. We have smaller designated cities and townships, and the rest of it is agriculture.
True.
Right? And most of our agriculture, over 80% of that is smallholder farmers. So it's not particularly organized agriculture. So if you want to grow here, you have to operate on a more communal basis and have smaller infrastructure and systems and structures closer to where this activity is happening, right? That's what we're doing. And then you use technology to connect all of that together. So far, that's worked. It's quite exciting how it's going. We're operating that now across Nigeria and Cameroon, and we hope to be able to do it continentally. So I think the difference with us is the approach and growing smaller and closer.
I'm not going to ask you what your challenges are. I'm going to tell you what they are. Two major challenges. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and when they were in Nigeria, they were spending about ₦1 million on power supply monthly. Now they are in America and they're spending about $100, which is about 165,000 naira. And Nigeria, they've told us they need to cut down electricity subsidies, and so the tariffs are quite high. We've seen significant increase. So your first challenge is power supply. To be able to preserve stuff, you need consistent power supply. And the alternative, which is sustainable power supply, solar, is not cheap.
It's not.
So that's your first problem, electricity tariffs. Let's speak about that first before I talk about fuel and transportation logistic costs.
So logistics is the major challenge. So
Yes,
as
so
far
let's
as
talk about the
power,
smaller problem.
where we operate, at least for our farm gate infrastructure, is completely off-grid. Okay. And that's where the support comes in, right? Because then now you have patient capital willing to sort of fund the off-grid operations.
Okay.
And give you enough time, so they're not on your back for you to pay that money back. So for us, in fact, for some of them, that's a prerequisite. Even if they're not energy-focused investors, the idea that it's green as it could possibly be is an attractive thing for them. So for us, that is not really one of our problems. And also, because we're operating smaller units, the cost for each smaller unit is less, as opposed to if we had one massive factory. So for us, at least for Zebra Crop Bank, that's not really a challenge. For Zebra Agro Industry, it's a different conversation altogether, right? But for your next question...
Fuel, and it's twofold. One, we've seen price of fuel increase tenfold in the last 1 year.
Yes.
It's crazy. To get here today, I had to top up the fuel in my car, and it cost me 50,000 naira to top up, so it wasn't even empty. And that's more than some people's take-home bill. I have to do it. The next problem is I read an article by an investigative journalist earlier this year where they interviewed some lorry drivers and trucks, and they spoke about how to get items from one part of Nigeria to the other, they need at least 700,000 naira to pay at checkpoints to have access to pass. How does this affect what you're trying to do from the ground to the top? Because someone has to bear that cost.
So the cost, I mean, we bear that cost. The cost of moving commodities, for example, from Benue, so you have major offtake points in Nigeria for agro-commodities. Kano being a major one. Kano, Zaria, Kaduna, Lagos, Ogun. These are like major offtake points. So I'll use Kano, Benue to Kano. From Benue to Kano, you can pay anywhere between 1.5 and 2.2 million naira one way to move a 30-ton truck. And so that's one part of it, the cost. But also getting the truck. Sometimes you're waiting a whole week or more to get a truck.
Excuse me.
So you don't have, there's a scarcity of designated companies that are focused on commodities logistics, at least agro-commodities logistics. So you're dealing with mom and pops, individual truck drivers in their trucks, different prices, there's price disparity. So your guys, if you're trying to operate a wide systemized network of processing or storage facilities, it's difficult to predetermine the price of movement. Yeah? So your guys in the field can call you today and say, oh, the cost of moving is 1.5. The very next day, it's 1.8. So there's room for cheating. But then also, you don't know that you're going to get the truck when you need it. And that's a major challenge, considering two things: the spoilage, which is time sensitive, and then secondly, offtake. Your buyers typically would give you an LPO, right, for, say, there's a fixed price for a 2-week period, sometimes even a 1-week period. So if that time law, when you're waiting for a truck, affects also your returns. So it's very difficult. I think logistics is one of our major problems. And most companies don't want to go into logistics as well. We are very reluctant to go into that because that's a business on its own. Some of our board members have pushed for us to possibly set up our own logistics line. But you know how it is dealing with the truck drivers. And,
I know.
every day they'll call you something is
You know what?
sporting.
In 2014, 2015, about 2014, I'd come back from the UK and I found out that each time I had to travel, you book a car in advance and it picks you up the next morning before Uber, Bolt and the likes. And so you make a call and they come pick you. And I was like, if you force Nigerians to plan, they will plan. As careless as we are with time, it's rare for Nigerians to miss their flight unless there's some people who get to the airport early when they have an international flight and all whatnot. And so I started a business called Smart Drop where people could pay monthly and the car comes, picks you up in the morning, takes you to work, in the evening comes and takes you back home.
Nice.
That's all. And so the time in between they could do airport pickups or whatever, which was great. And I bought a couple of cars.
That's awesome.
But the reason why this failed, one, I was ahead of my time because we didn't have Uber and Bolt. Each time the truck drivers go out, in your case, there's always one who will come and tell you, my engine just went off, my tires are bad. And so I found out that while the business model, everything was good, I was spending a lot of money trying to get the cars fixed because they don't own it, so they'll drive it anyhow. Then they're the ones who, when they have free time, they'll go and pick people along the road and then they get arrested and then they call you and they blame the devil for all their problems. And so I understand the potential problems with running your own logistics business because there's the human angle to it and there are people who just want to always find corners and the likes. But despite all of that, you've had an amazing couple of years. Let's talk about the Crop Bank and NCX. I know you had something with the Nigerian Commodity Exchange.
Yes.
What was that about?
So we signed a partnership, an MOU with the Nigerian Commodities Exchange, where Zebra Crop Bank would work alongside the exchange to build and deploy last-mile farm gate infrastructure for storage and primary processing, which would then serve as a feeder for the commodities to be traded on the exchange. So it's a marriage of both the infrastructure, which we would build, but then also the technology, both in financial technology and supply chain technology, which would then give NCX, alongside us, access to the relevant data to predict, what's happening in this space and forecast. You look at countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. 2-3 months before harvest, they're able to predetermine, for cocoa, they're able to predetermine or at least estimate what the outcome of that season is going to be and what the possible gaps in supply are going to be, and they can plan accordingly, right? And that's a marriage of data, technology, et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to do the same thing here for across value chains, starting with dry commodities first, grains and oilseeds, because that's what we produce the most in Nigeria, right? And then building going forward. So it's a very exciting partnership. I think they have the current team of NCX, they have some very sharp young people in there. So I'm excited to work with them.
Love to hear that. A couple of years ago, Nigerian yam was finally approved to be exported out of the country. And some people tried it, but by the time they got to their destination, they were all bad. Nigeria is the world's largest producer of cassava. And world's largest producer of yam.
Yeah, number one.
Cowpea, sorghum, second largest. Palm oil, we've now dropped to number 5. Cocoa beans, number 5. Why do we say Nigeria to the world, but we can't get this product to the world? And you have Indians growing these crops and now sending them back to us, including Gary. I've seen Gary in a store in Nigeria that was made in India.
I mean, we were importing rice. Prior to the Buhari administration, our rice imports were significant, right? So I think where the gap has been, at least in the recent past, so the federal government, they have tried. The last administration, the new administration, still too early to tell, but the last administration made some efforts in the agriculture space, significantly so. A lot of that did not work, not out of a lack of trying, but I think it was probably a strategy thing. So the federal government channeled a lot of capital into the space. And then you had agriculture companies and startups raising so much money so quickly, right? But dancing to the tune of their own drum. The government's operating here. They're operating here, right? So there was no marriage, convergence as such. What I believe would have been a better strategy would be the federal government, or at least regional or state governments. They have their own framework and say, listen, our core commodities of interest, at least for the next 4 years, right, where we see strategic growth, would be commodity A, B, C, D, E. And you sit down, what are the gaps here? What are the routes? Where is it being produced? So what are the challenges logistics-wise, storage-wise, processing-wise, and pre-farming support? Then all these other companies that have already raised the money, companies like ourselves, would then plug into that framework. It's plug and play. So a company that says, okay, we've raised money for logistics, then you plug into the logistics alongside government, they're helping you build out that belt, that corridor. The same thing with primary processing, the same thing with storage, the same thing with pre-farming support. For example, under the Anchor Borrower program that the federal government had through the central bank, a factory would be established as an anchor, and through the central bank you get funding to the farmers to produce enough to feed that factory and to sell to the factory sometimes at a predetermined price because you're getting pre-support. But what would happen is after the farmers are provided with the necessary inputs or whatever, some of them sell at a price at the open market, don't sell to the factory. So the factory is still struggling to meet. And then even the ones that are produced, you now have the quality issues, et cetera, et cetera. That's because the value chain, that is the supply chain systems from storage, logistics, everything, don't exist. If they existed, then as soon as the inputs are being dispensed, you have the dispensary there in that community. So you have someone going to the farm to see what's being produced. You can't, the room to maneuver for a farmer becomes that much smaller. And then as soon as it's harvest, because the storage facility is right there, it goes straight into storage and it can be preserved. The logistics channels are clearly established. And these are all individual companies. And that product goes all the way from pre-farming, farming, post-harvest, primary processing, down to the off-taker, the factory. People are raising this money. This money exists, right? Every day you wake up, you hear another startup on Tech Cabal has raised $20 million. You wonder where's the money going to, right? Everyone's doing their interview, and a lot of them have failed as well. So on the one hand, the government is struggling. On the other hand, these startups are also struggling. I think there now needs to be a marriage, right? Because the startups have the smart ideas, but sometimes maybe a little disconnected from the realities of the space. They need time to sort of garner the information and data that the government has been able to garner over years as a continuum, right? So they have the smart solutions, but maybe not necessarily for this market. The government, on the other hand, needs to create a system and framework where they can work alongside these companies, you know? And I think that that would be a very good, in a rough sense, a very good strategy.
Ideally, because I remember in 2020, I have this, we have space in Benue, so there's the farm, and I had applied for this, whatever. And at some point, I actually got called that, oh, I've been approved, this is how much it's been. The money never came out because Nigeria has policies. They have the right things put in place. They have NISA, which handles the risking, the likes. They have the NISA Microfinance Bank. But at some point, it was alleged that they changed the list and gave politicians, everybody bring 10 people from your constituency and let's help them. And so there's that disconnect. If government actually handles it the way the tech space has been able to have a little bit of independence but collaboration with government, I do agree with you. And maybe we'll get better solutions because, yes, the tech space and the young people, they don't see the full picture. They just see quick, but there's a bigger process and all of that. And so Nigeria has all the policies put in place, all the laws, but implementing and getting people to think on the same page and get it done is another conversation. But with all that you do, and before we even talk about you, the government now has a livestock ministry. How important is livestock to the agricultural space in Nigeria, because I always remember Netherlands and Denmark, how much milk they produce. I recall during Governor El Rufai's time, Dano came to set up a factory of sorts in Kaduna State. I don't know the progress and how that has gone, but how important is livestock in the scheme of things with what we do here in the agricultural space?
I mean, I think it's particularly important, twofold, apart from the fact that we as Nigerians really chop, right? We consume a lot,
True.
but also for the non-livestock part of agriculture, livestock is a great off-taker. So when we started, for instance, we were producing animal feed, both fish feed and poultry feed and cattle feed. Our biggest off-takers across all segments of agriculture we operated in then were the livestock people, right? So in general, it's a good off-taker. Secondly, we're a growing population. I think it's a no-brainer. I think it's a no-brainer in terms of livestock.
I remember when we started having some, let's call it economic adjustments in Nigeria in the last 1 year. The first people who felt the brunt were the poultry farmers.
Yes.
Because cost of feed with the velocity of the naira had gotten higher. I heard these animals, they love to eat as well. That's so expensive. But they felt it. Then bakers also felt that. How easy or difficult is it having this feed manufactured and processed here in Nigeria to the right level where it's actually nutritious for the livestock? Because you say Nigerian cow and you see one in some other places and you're like...
I mean, the Nigerian cows are open grazing. The strain on the cow, first of all, walking from one part of the country,
Our cows,
to
they're
another.
feed farmer.
Exactly. So they're organic. They're eating organically. Whereas in the West, these cows are ajabotas. They're in enclosed spaces, deliberately being fed with vitamins, everything, right? To get the cows or the animals to look and grow to a certain level. So it's very different to how they practice it. I mean, in certain categories like poultry, we have something similar with poultry here, right? So you see when you go to the agric chicken, you see them looking very robust. But as far as cattle, I mean, for the most part, our cattle's open graze, right? Which is the difference. Apart from the fact that there's a breed difference, but even the open grazing and the strain on the cattle moving from one part of the country to another also has its effect on, So
Back to talking about you. You like school, you like learning.
I don't know that I like school.
Well, I don't like school. I have a PhD, but I know it's important for me. But Acumen Academy, what was that about? So
Acumen is an impact investment organization with, I guess, two objectives or two arms. They have the impact investment arm, which is the core of it. They're one of the most reputable impact investors, one of Africa's biggest impact investors as well. Then the academy is a leadership program where they, try to identify people doing great things that are community-oriented, social, with a high social impact across everything. So not just business now, everything to advocacy, human rights, and then business, social entrepreneurship, things of that nature, and get them into a program. Apart from fostering camaraderie, where you because these journeys can be very lonely sometimes, right? So they put like minds in the building and you exchange ideas, but then also they bequeath you with the necessary skills sometimes that when you're in the thick of it, you're just thinking of what you're trying to do. There are these other skill sets that can help you, right? For example, using your authentic voice, telling your story, conflict management as well within that space, leveraging opportunities, just a series of things. I found it I think it's probably one of the most helpful programs I've been through.
Interesting. I saw recently, within the last 1-2 years, your company also won an award for Growth Startup from FAO. That's a big deal. What was that about? Oh, yeah. So we won the Global Innovation of the Year at the World Food Forum by the United Nations FAO in Rome. That was very unexpected for us and very huge because the FAO is the United Nations FAO is the largest agriculture organization in the world.
the World Food Programme is the largest agriculture event in the world. And the Global Innovation Prize for agriculture is, I guess, within that program, within that event, the largest agriculture award you could win. So for us to win that, when we were nominated at first as a finalist, for me and for my entire team,
That was already a win.
that was a win. We were going, we had won. We were at the stage, and then we got, there were 4 categories. So we won in the better production category first. When that was announced, I was, ecstatic. So I got the award, came back to my seat, and I was still messaging everybody, in Nigeria to say, man, check out the award, we just won this. And while I was doing that, they announced the Global Innovation of the Year. And I hadn't heard it the first time, right? So when they announced it, the people next to me were tapping me like, and I looked up like, what is it? And they said, Zebra, you guys won. I was like, what? It was beyond exciting, especially because our solution at the time was very new.
Yeah.
So that sort of validation was very emboldening and has been and continues to be emboldening for us. The idea that the companies who were alongside us were awesome companies doing great stuff. I remember one of them, their revenue, I don't know if it was the current revenue or projected revenue for the following year was about $200 million, So, and here we are, this baby company. It's like a lion cub with a big roar and big dreams, and winning that, at least it let us know we're on the right track. It let us know that if we put our heads down and actually tried, we could possibly make a difference. But more importantly, it also helped us get support, because what tends to happen in this space is, it's not, as you said, it's not a very sexy space.
No, it's not.
So some of these things help with conversations, with all kinds of support, and it's been great so far.
So, rapid fire. How important is leadership?
Leadership is everything, but actually no, leadership is not everything. Leadership is very important, but I think equally important is followership as well. If we think of Nigeria or any country, people keep talking about our leaders are bad leaders. Yeah, but the leader emerges from the populace that the leadership emerges. So you don't just get up there and all of a sudden, that person who's a leader, that training starts from the very beginning. You have to first of all be a good follower, yeah? Because before you were a leader, you were a follower, exactly. So I think it's important both ways, but like everything, I think that it's important to focus on things at the grassroots, at the inception stage, yeah? If you're trying to train a leader, you train them from nursery school, For a company as well, you want someone to rise up and be the head of a company, you have to check what that person's trajectory has been, or at least work deliberately to get a person to understand every rung of that ladder properly, so that when they eventually are leaders, they have a clear understanding, right? It's like the Chinese system of government, where you have to go through it all to get up here, right? So you understand clearly. What we have here and in a lot of other places, countries, but also companies, is people are just thrust onto leadership. Maybe they have the charisma, the charm, or the resources, and they become leaders. And then when they're there, they're trying to figure it out, figure everything else out, because they don't understand everything that's happened below. And how do you now connect with the people? What are their pain points? It's very true for a company. It's also very true for a country.
Next 10 years, where do you see your company?
Next 10 years? I see us as a continental player in the next 10 years. Our hope, our collective hope, is that the solutions and the systems that we are espousing at the moment would be found to be very viable and to a great extent copied and pasted by other entities across the continent. So our hope is that we would have given something by way of a solution that can be replicated across the continent, whether or not that has to do, whether we're directly tied to that or not. The point is that the problem's solved, but at least we'd have the street cred of having been one of the entities that that sort of spearheaded that direction.
Okay, 4 questions for you. The first one is in line with what we're saying. The last 3 are personal. In 2025, some people want to go into agriculture. What 3 areas or items would you encourage people to look at?
I'll say facets of agriculture. I would say post-harvest is the easiest to go into because, I mean, you need years of knowledge, I guess, to go into pre-harvest, so farming. Post-harvest, primary processing might be the cheapest to go into in post-harvest. So primary processing, there's opportunity there. Logistics is a huge opportunity there, like I've mentioned. Yeah. Where's the camera? Where's the screen? If anybody sets up an agro-logistics company, please find me. We need your solutions, right? We're willing to pay. So logistics for agriculture, primary processing for agriculture, definitely a huge opportunity there. A lot of these machineries are made locally, so you don't even have to import them. You can actually buy them for 2, 3, 1 point something to 3, 4, 5 million naira. So I think these two facets are very good. Secondary processing as well, if you have the capital, can be very promising. But the important thing is to locate your factory close to where your raw materials are. Don't go and build it in the city because of convenience, right? If your product is in Ushongo, in Benue, go and set up the factory there. Yeah. The opportunities are incredible here. There's a market for probably everything, right? You do it right, you will not fail.
Okay, so we've agreed on this show that I don't believe in New Year resolutions, but we believe in the power of 3. 3 things you want to stop doing in 2025.
Number 1, I mean, I say this every year, procrastinating. I procrastinate.
My last guest, Jack, was saying the same thing, and that was his first
procrastination is one of my major flaws. So procrastination, one. Doubt. I think I want to be bolder going forward. Not that I'm full of doubt, but, you know, it creeps in. That sort of imposter syndrome.
I had that 2 days ago.
Yeah,
like,
you
I
had
by
that.
myself, and I had that. I was like, I had a great year, but I still had that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
You know, so imposter syndrome and just feeling like, so that is the second thing. What's the third thing? I think make more time. Over the past 2 years, 3 years even, I've been so focused on work and growth and in that sense that I've ignored the more social and family side of things. So I haven't kept in touch. And I think that's been very terrible.
3 things you want to start next year.
Start next year?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be new, but 3 things you want to do next year.
What do I want to do next year? I want to travel more. I mean, I already travel a lot, but
Wow.
I want to travel even more. I love traveling, but spend more time, connect better there. That's one. I want to travel more on the continent, specifically.
Yeah.
That's one.
Number 2?
Number 2, I think and this goes against the fact that I said I don't really like learning, but I'm now considering possibly, not by way of a degree, but going into programs where I learn more. I think the world has changed a lot in the past 3 years, and I found that I'm a bit short of knowledge, yeah? With AI and everything happening, so I need to, you know, not just Googling, but actually go to an institution of some sort and learn.
Number 3?
Number 3 would be, enjoy more. I need
like
to enjoy more.
It's important. Now, finally, 3 things you were proud of yourself in 2024.
2024. I think we empowered a lot of farmers in the past year. The numbers looked very good. And our engaged farmers, and they stayed engaged. I was very proud of that.
Number 2?
Number 2, our team. I was so proud of the team. A lot of us were learning as we were going along, but the growth with most of our team members between the start of the year and our last meeting was incredible. So I'm very proud of that, very happy about that. Finally, I'm actually proud of Nigeria. Considering the hardships in recent times, yeah?
Yeah.
We're a resilient people, though.
Yeah.
Nigerians were tough. We're tough. I actually thought we would have unraveled by now. Some of the hardship probably necessary. Some of them maybe not. But the fact is we're plowing along. We're going along. We're moving. And despite the pain, we're still managing to smile. Over the Christmas holidays, I've seen more smiles than I expected.
I
you know?
agree.
So,
I
yeah.
agree. I think that's a great place to leave it. But key point, learn to enjoy more. Like this life now, you need to
Chop life, my brother.
You need to do that for yourself. Buffy,
course.
always a pleasure having conversations with you. I said
Great
this
stuff.
earlier that the conversations I'll be having over the next couple of weeks with my friends who I respect and love their opinion are conversations we would have had without the camera on.
Over
And
coffee
it's
or drinks.
exactly, for us to keep on having this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
been a
All the
pleasure.
best with Zebra Group. We're
you.
rooting for you, and you always have a platform here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
That's the
much.
much we can take on the political segment. We'll take a quick break. When we return, is in with the entertainment segment. Don't go away.